second reading is taken from Matthew chapter 11, verses 2 to 11. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he." Amen.
There is room. There's plenty of room here this morning. It was good of the Methodist Church to do this message, to put it out on our behalf. It's a really good message. It's a good thing to have on a poster. It's a good thing to tell people. In this place, there is room. And there is room because there is room in God's message, in God's story, in God's kingdom. It's a good message to put out there. And yet, by that message going out on our behalf, it means we've got to live up to it. And that is a challenge. That is difficult. That requires a lot from us. We're very good, though, at making room at church, in this building, in this place, welcoming people, encouraging people into things. We're kind and open. But when maybe we get into the details, or when maybe it goes beyond this place, the church, not this church, the church as a whole, can lose a little bit of the "there is room." Someone comes to church for the first time. Let's call them Bob. Bob comes. He's never been to church before. He comes in, he's made welcome. He's encouraged to go through and sit down. He hears the service, he hears the songs, he's not really heard them before, and he finds them difficult to pick up. But the service was okay, and the sermon was okay, but he has some questions. Well, the best person to ask is the person who's preaching. Except the preacher is really busy after the service, doing lots of different things, and talking to all the regular congregation who wish to have the preacher's time, and talking about all the little bits about church that keep it going and keep it running. that Bob doesn't find the opportunity to talk to the preacher about the service, to ask the questions. That's okay, Bob thought. I can ask questions in future. I'll come back. Bob instead tries to find people to talk to who were at the service. But while waiting for the preacher, he's found that everybody's got into their little groups over coffee, and they're all talking to one another, and they're getting on well, and it seems like a good, happy place to be. But Bob doesn't really know how to get involved in those conversations with people who all know each other so well. But he stands on the edge long enough, and eventually someone pays him attention and starts to talk to him. And they talk a bit about how things are going and what Bob's life involves. And Bob reveals that actually he's quite lonely. He doesn't have a lot going on. He doesn't have many people to talk to. He lives alone. He eats alone. And the person listens. And they wish him well. And they hope to see him next week. And Bob's whole week continues to be empty and lonely, eating alone, being alone, until he comes back to church the following Sunday. How much room is there for Bob? In some ways there is room, and in some ways we can fool ourselves that Bob had plenty of room, because Bob was made welcome when he arrived. Bob's able to get a cup of tea. Bob's able to sit in the service like the rest of us. But actually, does Bob have room when he's in church? But also, does Bob have room throughout the week? See, the thing is, the Methodist Church has put out this message, there is room, and we automatically think, in here. But we are the church outside of here. We are the church in our homes. We are the church in our social activities. We are the church when we are walking down the street. Is there room? Is there room for other people in our lives? In Jesus' ministry, there was room. Room for all people. Room for people who weren't welcome in other spaces. Room for people to come and sit and take Jesus' time, to sit and eat. And it can be hard to make room for that. It can be hard to make room for strangers to come into our space with our families, fitting around our work and our commitments, taking the energy that we have that maybe feels quite precious at times. And yet, that's what we're called to. That's the example Jesus gives us. So how do we deal with that? Because it's easy to say, well, tough, get on with it, make room. But how do we actually do that? Firstly, it's about recognizing it. Recognizing how much room we have in our lives for others. Recognizing how much room we have in our lives for the world outside the church, which can be very consuming. but we also have our work and our families, and they need time. There's only so much we can do about that. One thing Jesus does is Jesus takes time out. A couple of hours here and there, he goes away in solitude to pray. He doesn't go for days on end, really. He just goes for short amounts of time to pray, to gather himself. But notice one thing he doesn't do is he doesn't push people away. He doesn't say, no, I'm having my space here and you need to go away from my space. He goes and finds his own space. And then he comes back and he is open to people to approach him. So something we need to do is find our spaces where we can get that energy, get that connection with God so that we are ready to open and be welcome to people and to show people that there is room in our lives and in what we do. Find a space where we can re-energize so that we've got what we need for those interactions. But then we also need to be prepared to welcome people into our space, to hold on less tightly. As you all know, we've opened our homes up. We've got Max living with us, and we've got Tanya and Kirill and Timur also living with us. And I'm sorry to talk about you while you're here, Max, but I won't lie in saying that it's not been difficult in some senses. It's been a real big change, and it's been a change that we've had to get used to. Because actually, our homes, in some ways, become our fortresses, don't they? They're our space, and they're our space for us and our family. And so the hard part is actually letting people into that. But it's not something I regret. It's not something Hannah regrets. It's something that's been a blessing to us. Something that we value and treasure. And they have brought as much blessing, if not more blessing, to our lives as we have to theirs. And it's just good and joyful to be able to live out bits of Scripture where people seem less, to be holding on less tightly to the things that sort of modern-day Western society holds on so tightly to. And so family actually gets bigger. And love is more constant and more present. And you discover more and learn more. You laugh more. Sometimes you cry more, but you do it with others. Making room can seem scary and difficult. But I think more often than not, it's a blessing. It's a good thing. And it's a blessing for us who make room, as well as the people we have made room for. And we have friendships now, from my point of view. I won't speak for Max. He might not want to talk to us again, but we have friendships from my point of view that will last a lifetime. If we're too precious about our space, if we're too precious about our time, actually, if we're too precious about our family, we miss out on things. We miss out on the blessings of other people. to make room for others is to offer our love, but also to make space for their love and their gifts and their talents. So, how are we with the message that there is room? Are we confident that we can say there is room in God's story? And are we telling people that? That in Jesus' birth story, there is room for everybody. And that is shown by the shepherds and the wise men. That is shown by the fact that Mary was chosen and Joseph was involved. That is shown by the story of John the Baptist. That is shown in this passage in Matthew. That is shown in Jesus' ministry. Our message is that there is room. Are we confident in that message? Then are we sharing and showing that message? Do we share and show that message here at Trinity, in this building, in this place, when we have activities and when we have our services and when we have our coffee and when we have our meetings? Is there room for people to join in, to be welcomed, to offer their voice, to offer their experiences? And then the question is there room in your lives outside of this place? In the places that are precious? In our homes? In our time? Round our meal tables? In our social activities? In our family life? It might be you're saying, I can only go so far on this. Actually, there are some things that I'm not prepared to let go of yet. Acknowledge that. Don't pretend that's not the case. Allow God to work in the spaces that you are making room for. And then ask God to help you make room in those other spaces, those guarded spaces. And when the time is right, and when the Spirit has worked, you'll find you'll be able to do that. Just don't assume that there is room. Sometimes we've just got to look and pay attention and notice whether there is actually room and whether there's something we need to do to make room. Let's pray.